I really like puzzle games, despite being objectively terrible at them. Part of the reason that I gravitate towards them is that puzzle games often share certain characteristics that are things that I like about games in general. There's often colourful, distinctive visuals, interesting, simple gameplay hooks, and the chance to prove myself capable of solving a problem more complicated than what should I put in this sandwich. The fact that I'm terrible at them, Baba Is You being my Dark Souls, somehow never puts me off playing them. I've recently played two very different, very good puzzle games. Is This Seat Taken is a super cute project from Barcelona-based developer Poti Poti Studios and published by Wholesome Games, released on August 7th, 2025. The game has you arranging a number of characters in a variety of spaces according to their preferences. You might have to arrange the passengers in a taxi based on who wants to sit by the window, or who has forgotten to shower and who has an aversion to bad smells. As the game progresses, you move through a number of settings, each of which introduces some light environmental mechanics, food that can be moved around, seats that can be flipped up, and it's all wrapped up in a pretty adorable visual style, with some wonderful video game voice gibberish and a breezy runtime. It's modest in presentation and scope, but has clearly struck a chord. It currently sits at an 80 on OpenCritic, and an 82 on Metacritic. The other game is Mind Over Magnet, the debut game from Mark Brown, otherwise known as Game Maker's Toolkit, the excellent, popular game dev YouTube channel. Mind Over Magnet is a puzzle platformer, originally released in November 2024 on Steam, where you play a little robot on a single wheel called Uni, who is trying to escape a factory with the help of a sentient magnet called Magnus. You solve environmental puzzles through the power of magnetism, moving platforms, blocking lasers, reversing polarities, that sort of thing. It's not a mold-breaking game by any means, but it is clearly the product of someone with an eye for design. It features a lot of ideas within a small scope, remains tightly focused throughout, and I really appreciated the bite-sized, puzzle-by-puzzle, level-by-level approach. Even when I got stuck, it never felt unmanageable. There was something else that elevated both experiences, that carried me through even when I got stuck, and that was the soundtracks. Again, they're both very different, but very good. Excellent, in fact. They were both melodic, very appealing to the ear, never annoying, and always inspiring. I got stuck, hung up on some puzzles I couldn't conceive of a solution to, but I didn't care, because I like listening to these games as much as I like playing them. Is This Seat Taken is quite a mellow work, incorporating the influence of a number of genres, jazz, bossa nova, flamenco, with some infectious motifs and a wide range of instrumentation from guitar to bassoon to mellotron, and a whole lot of whistling. Mind Over Magnet, meanwhile, is pretty low-key electronica, with some trip-hop influenced percussion, reverb-assisted ambience, that never sacrifices strong, glittering melodies. You'll be hearing samples from both throughout the episode, and if you like them, and you're able, I do of course encourage you to support the creators by buying the soundtracks on either Steam or Bandcamp, which is where I got them. And don't worry if you can't look now, links and credits are in the show notes. Now, I play through these games because they are fundamentally good games, that you should check out if they sound interesting, and when I'm done, I put them down. But I keep on listening to the soundtracks. Now, how did this music get me through these games? How do you compose music for games, where music is supposed to get out of the way, but is still so listenable on its own? Now, I can't answer that, but there's two people who can. Hi, I'm Andrew. Welcome to Dialogue Tree. This is episode 18. Problem Solved. Designing Music for Puzzle Games, with Rupert Cole and Zach Jones.
Hi, I'm Rupert Cole. I'm a soundtrack composer for films, games, TV, podcasts, whatever anyone else will pay me for, basically. And yeah, I love puzzle games, and I love movies as well, and I love making music for them all.
Rupert Cole is a soundtrack composer for films, TV and games, with over 60 credits across those mediums. He obtained an MA in composition for film and television in 2017, and his work has been featured on networks such as Cartoon Network, PBS, iPlayer, Amazon Prime, and HBO Max. His TV and film work is great, but for me, his soundtrack work for video games is pretty astonishing, and it really demonstrates his versatility. There's Super Agent, which is evocative of the 16-bit era with a few nods to spy media, and the bouncy off-kilter soundtrack to the bouncy and off-kilter completely stretchy. Then, there's train management sim Railroute, with a reflective, melancholic sound based around keys and strings, and the completely other end of the spectrum, my personal favourite, the absolutely wild, sample-heavy soundtrack to Otto's Galactic Groove. Now there's a lot to talk about, but first, to get to know a bit about Rupert's gaming history, where he's coming from, I asked him if there was any one game that made him a fan of games, that took them from distraction or plaything to hobby.
That's a great question. So the first game that comes to mind, I think for a lot of people my age will probably be the same answer, is Super Mario Sunshine on the GameCube, when my parents were raising me when I was a wee lad, they decided to buy into the Nintendo kind of universe, I guess, with a GameCube purchase as opposed to a PlayStation. As I'm sure you recall, the marketing was quite stark between those two kind of gaming worlds. My dad specifically was saying, I remember him telling me about this, that he kind of thought it was a good system for you get to know the characters. They seem quite wholesome, not quite Disney-fied, but just a bit less violent, I guess, is the baseline. So that was where we started with the GameCube, and there was a lot of great games on there that I remember playing growing up, but Sunshine was definitely the one where my goodness, I just poured, as a child is wont to do, you just pour hours and hours and hours into it, exploring every possible secret crevice, secret corner, whatever you can do with it, you've done it. I think another one would be Link's Awakening. That's another one when I was a little bit younger on the Game Boy, I played that. The Game Boy Color, I should say, Link's Awakening Deluxe, very important distinction there. And that was one I replayed as an adult with the remake, and only then did the penny drop how little progress I made in that game as a child, because I just would run around the woods over and over again, and that was my whole adventure, basically, like the first area. And there was a whole, basically, 50 to 70% of the game that I'd never even touched because I just was not competent enough. But I still loved it. The escapism of it. It sparks the imagination. That's what makes it so special.
It's actually quite strange how similar our experiences with Link's Awakening were, but that's a story for another day. The breadth of style and tone in Rupert's work is fascinating to me. So I asked Rupert about his history in composition and if there was a moment in his career when that ability or impulse to pursue multiple styles crystallized.
Thank you for recognizing that, because that's something I definitely pride myself on, is the breadth of, like, I would say musical interests. Like I try to listen to a lot of different styles of music, and I'm also very interested in bringing musical styles not traditionally associated with video games into the video game world. That is an exciting possibility to me, because I feel like more so than other art forms, music can be quite constrained when it comes to genre in video games. There's a lot of expectation because there's so much more music in video games compared to feature films, for instance. So my background as a musician, I think that's probably that's the kind of way I narrativize it, is that I grew up playing saxophone, percussion. I learned piano a little bit later as well. So that's percussion and drums. So I was playing in wind bands and jazz bands and orchestras, and I was in an indie rock band when I was in school, and then I was in a noise rock band when I was in university. So my musicianship was very broad, and that wasn't something it wasn't something that I actively sought out. It just kind of came naturally to me. And I think I've taken that into composition, into my compositional career. And in terms of my steps into composing, and then I guess the question of that decision about breadth of styles as a professional. That's an interesting one. I mean, it's tough to pinpoint because I'm sure you're aware you kind of get offered projects that you might not necessarily have expected, or the way the freelance composer works is not always a direct line. It's not a straight line, is it really? So
No, sure.
so you kind of capitalize on opportunities that make their way to you. But yeah, my first experience composing was after university, after undergraduate degree. I hadn't really decided that I wanted to pursue composition, but it was after I graduated. I was living with someone who was a game developer who was finishing their final year project over the summer, and I just thought, okay, well, I've just got a boring office job and I'm bumming around a little bit. Why don't I just try messing around with Logic and see what happens? And then I just got the bug from there, really. And so in terms of the breadth of composition styles, I think that reflects my my broader approach to work as well, because I'm not really just a games composer. I do a lot of work for animation, scoring. I do film work, short films. I'm working on some feature films as well. So that, like, the diversity of compositional approach and possibility, that is really exciting to me. So it's not something I've ever boxed myself in on.
What was the first game that you worked on?
Oh my goodness, what was the first game? I suppose it was that one that I was doing when I was at university. So that was it wasn't a commercial project, it was just a student project for a bit of fun. But that was one where basically I was just ripping off the Assassin's Creed soundtrack like for like, pretty much. I was just, it was almost, reflecting on it, it was pretty much it was like a rescoring exercise almost, you know, like these, or a redesign exercise of me just being like, okay, can I get that harp sound and the kind of mellow strings of the Jesper Kid, Assassin's Creed? Because when would that have been? That would have been like 2014 or something, 10 years ago. So that was kind of peak Assassin's Creed cultural relevance, I feel, at that time. But yeah, in terms of my first kind of commercial game project, I think it was a visual novel, like a gothic visual novel that I did, called Red Embrace, and that was fun, actually. That's another completely different musical style to the kind of Assassin's Creed style rip-off that I was doing. But that was quite a good way to kind of dip into video game composing, because it's not, the nature of a visual novel means that it's not very interactive. You're kind of just writing scenes, music to sit in scenes, so there's not too much complexity in terms of stems or dynamic music. It's more just about a discipline of, can you capture the essence of a mood within a track within 2 minutes? So that aspect definitely kind of gave me the bug. I just love that. That's, I would call that a puzzle in and of itself, you know.
That's an excellent segue into talking about Is This Seat Taken? So this is a very specific kind of game. It's a very laid back puzzle game. So to get some of the sort of the big obvious questions out of the way, first, what is your experience with puzzle games? Do you have any particular favourites?
Yes, so I was looking at my DQ Deals collection list. So some of my favourite, I'm going to list off probably there's the obvious ones. I think, like Animal Well, I would call that a puzzle game. Dungeons of Dreadrock is one that I've played recently, and there's a sequel as well. That's an amazing dungeon puzzle game that's kind of like based on old school dungeon crawlers, you know, grid-based dungeon crawlers. I really, really rate that one. And Beast Breaker is another one that I played that I think is a bit of an underrated gem, which is where you play as basically any game in which you play as a tiny mouse with a giant sword. I will buy that game instantly. I don't even want to know anything else about it. I'm an instant sale, and that's what you're doing in this game. And it's kind of like a Peggle type puzzle game.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, there's many more. I can list them all off. I think another one final shout out I would say is Good Job on Nintendo Switch, which was Nintendo published, and I think it kind of flew under the radar. And I played that with my wife in co-op, and that was so much fun. It's so silly, and it's like it's kind of action puzzle, I would say, but like similar to Is This Seat Taken, there's not really a time pressure. It encourages you to have fun and mess around and try things, and that's what I love about the fluidity of the genre.
Of those games, would you say there is any connective tissue in the soundtracks to them?
That's a good question. I feel like puzzle games as a genre are almost they're almost more kind of tonally agnostic than other game genres. Because even within the examples I give, it's like the concept of the game, Beast Breaker, for instance, it's almost like a Monster Hunter type setup. So you're this tiny mouse with a sword fighting these ginormous creatures, versus Good Job, you're 2 players in an office, with the visual style of the graphic design of like warning signs and things. So this was my when I was kind of thinking about the questions you sent over. I was kind of pondering on how the idea of a puzzle, and as a genre, actually underpins the whole of video games. Like any game you'll play will have a puzzle aspect to it. A Zelda game, that is famous for its puzzles, but you would never describe it. You would never categorize it as a puzzle game. You would say it's an action adventure game. But as part of the adventure, you're engaging in puzzles. So it's just, I mean, even something like a strategy game, you could argue, is rooted in the thinking of puzzle solution, because you're puzzling out what's the best strategy. Even if you're just playing, I don't know, Fortnite or something, and you're trying to work out what's the best technique for me. Am I going to go into the building and hide, or am I going to go? That's kind of a puzzle, a strategic puzzle in of itself. So in terms of the soundtracks being linked, I think that's the beauty of it, is that it's more defined. I mean, similar to what I was saying about this, the kind of the state of play and the mindset of the player, based on the environment. So in Beast Breaker, it's a lot more action oriented. In Good Job, the music is much more playing into the humor and the silliness and the slapstick wackiness of it. But yeah, maybe that's the unifying factor, is that it's on the whole it's going to be less intense, and that was definitely, like I was saying with Is This Seat Taken, that was our approach. That was the necessary approach of just creating a sense of not pressure, but just engagement and interest and intrigue.
What do you think are the hallmarks of a good puzzle game soundtrack?
Oh, good question. I think it's a tough one, because inevitably, I mean, I often find myself, I mean, dare I say, if there's a bad puzzle game soundtrack, I often find myself turning it off, because you're sitting there with a puzzle for a long time and you're hearing kind of 1 minute of music on a loop, and it just becomes it becomes grating, and that's the last thing that you want. You don't want it to become an annoyance in the background that distracts you from the puzzle. It should be heightening your sense of engagement and concentration and intrigue. So in musical terms, I would say that means, I mean, with Is This Seat Taken, I have used a motif throughout the whole score based on the title, this kind of, that little melody, which is kind of like, the idea being it's just a little thing you might just whistle while you're putting your porridge in the microwave or something. It's just like quite a laid back, cozy feeling tune. But even within that, it's not the tune isn't summoning a call to action or, pulling at your heartstrings. It's just kind of putting a little cheeky smile on your face. That was the intention behind it. So I guess, focusing on melodic writing that isn't ear catching, but then is still pleasing to the ear without drawing you away from the puzzle. And then I guess the same applies to the arrangement. Really, you don't want something that's just too insistent and too over the top. I mean, Animal Well's a good example where there's just not very much music at all. It's more about atmosphere, isn't it? But I guess that's kind of a puzzle adventure game, and that kind of stems from the adventure aspect, doesn't it, rather than the pure puzzle.
Some interesting points there about what goes into making a good puzzle game soundtrack. Are there any specifics, like with how you reflected that in the composition of the soundtrack to Is This Seat Taken?
Yes, I think it just comes back to that iterative process with the developers, really.
Okay.
I mean, there's so in terms of me sending a track and then the specifically the being specific feedback of, can we strip this back? Can we make this more gentle, more ambient, softer, less busy? And I think that balancing that kind of, I guess, composer sensibility with the developer sensibility is really really helpful. And then also in terms of the timbre and the selection of sounds is really, really important. So a lot of the sounds are, I guess this comes back to Animal Crossing being the prototype, I guess, of a game where you can just, there's music playing in the background, but it's so laid back. It's never drawing your ear. It's just part of the wind in the scene. You know, it's part of the moment. And similarly to that, you have a kind of halfway house of the nature of sounds that are selected. So things like a guitar. I feel like the signature sound, one of the signature sounds of the modern Animal Crossing games is like a MIDI guitar. It's like a guitar you know is not actually someone playing, but it's still an acoustic instrument, but kind of a keyboard version of it. There's something kind of cozy about that knowledge that it's not real. I don't know. I don't know about the psychology of that, but that was something definitely we leaned on. So like the mellotron is one of the key sounds in this soundtrack, which is it's a kind of like an old school sampler where recordings of particularly, so the flute was used. I mean, what's the Beatles song that uses it? That's probably the most famous example, isn't it? Is it Strawberry Fields? It's got that kind of nostalgic, cozy feeling, and that kind of halfway house of, it's a keyboard instrument, but it's playing back a tape recording of a live flute. So it kind of lives in this middle world of live, analog, digital, but still kind of that dusty tape feel. And then in terms of the drums are more electronic in this soundtrack, but they're very kind of mellow sounds. So we're taking off all of those digital overtones, those high frequencies, so that it has almost a sound designy kind of knocking on wood feeling to it, but then it's still from a digital origin. So again, it's kind of like striking that balance in terms of the sound selection, and that's definitely a key part of it too.
That's very interesting what you say about cutting out sort of the digital feeling of some of these instruments, because I've got a whole little section here about how I felt that so in listening to the soundtrack, it had like a very organic feel to it, and that it all sounded like organic instruments to me. And something that I think sort of stands out is the interplay between all of them. There's lots of little melodies, like all interplaying with each other, to the extent that it felt the soundtrack in quite a few parts feels like quite a playful conversation between these instruments. And like, would you say that's sort of a fair interpretation? Would you say that's a fair read on the soundtrack?
Absolutely, that is more than a fair read. That's a hard read, I would say. That's great, because that's how I was writing it. Because with the intention of writing it for this game, where you got all these kind of chatty little characters having fun on the screen, that definitely was this idea of, and that's where the idea of kind of having a lot of different kind of fragments of melody coming in and out, and then that actually ties back to this approach of trying to minimize the ear, like how much it's drawing your ear away from the game, rather than having kind of a long through line of a melody. It's more just kind of little smatterings of melodies and like cheeky little moments here and there that just kind of like tickle your ear, but then without kind of grabbing it, with all fingers. And actually so the reason it's a great read is because that was a lot of my compositional approach, was establishing kind of a accompaniment bass that was punched in. So you've got like in the Brussels track, that was the first track that I wrote for the game, that kind of mellotron melody, that kind of is running all the way through. So getting that in, and then playing through and just noodling around either on the guitar or on the keyboard, and just having those ideas like kind of like jazzy little lick moments, or like little funny chromatic moments, just basically riffing and seeing what what I was pleased with, and then recording it in, rather than it being a structured kind of, rondo structure or something, or grand melodic kind of structure. It was more just focusing on that feeling and that casual, that casual kind of to and froing of the melody here and there between instruments.
The music sounds like it's an extension of the conversations that the characters are having. It captures their sort of like playful, like babble, like video game babble dialogue, but expands on it to something that's a bit more listenable. So the game takes place in a number of cities, and the first of them is Barcelona. And like, even with my sort of rudimentary understanding of musical styles, there's some Spanish guitar in that. The other cities are Brussels, London, and New York. Did you seek to incorporate styles of music sort of native to those locations? And if so, how do you sort of arrange those for a puzzle game? And
yes.
Like one of the reasons I'm asking specifically this is because if that is the case, I have no idea what Belgian music sounds like, and I would really like to know more about what that is and what you've taken from it.
Yes, yeah, that's a funny one, isn't it? Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Brussels track was the first track I wrote for the game, and that wasn't with Brussels as a city or as a location in mind, actually. So there wasn't anything in that was region specific. That was more as a means of establishing the palette for the game when it was composed. So even when I wrote the track for the first time, we weren't 100% sure, is it going to be a menu track? Is it going to be a gameplay track? It was kind of just a means of breaking ground on the soundtrack. And so then the second track that I wrote was Barcelona, and the developers are actually Spanish, so they sent me a playlist of songs that, in their own words, they felt that they associated, that reminded them of Barcelona. That it wasn't even necessarily specifically not Spain as a whole, but quite specifically Barcelona, and which was really nice. And that was kind of an interesting challenge because those musical examples were very different to where we ended up with the track. So it was a lot more, I guess, kind of contemporary pop grounding with those Spanish elements. So I spent a little while kind of listening to those tracks and really, again, trying to puzzle out that aspect of how can I capture something, the essence of this music within the framework of the soundtrack that I'm composing, and make it feel cohesive. And more often than not, it's the bell curve really of, you're thinking about it and your first thought is, let's put some guitar in, and then you listen a bit more and you try to get loads of ideas, and then you end up coming back round to, let's just put some guitar in. Actually, that'll just do the job, as long as we can do it, tastefully and stylistically. But actually, there was other elements that we brought in. So there was, I think, just in one section in the track, there's a little bit of brass, but in an earlier version of it, we had quite a lot more trumpet and things like that. That was drawn from the other from the reference tracks, but in the end, it was that same process of kind of pulling out stuff to reduce complexity, and those were one of the first things that unfortunately got the chop. But yeah, so Brussels, unfortunately, to my great disappointment, I can't say this is the specific Brussels sound that we captured. So that's kind of a funny one. I don't know if there's anyone from Brussels that might listen and be able to give me a shout out of saying, this is what you should have done. So maybe for the next project. I do have a Belgian mate, actually. Maybe I should ask him. In terms of London and New York, so those were also so I guess the Barcelona track is definitely the one, because it's grounded in the guitar part. That's definitely the one that feels the most distinct out of the tracks. But the London was specifically winter in London as well. So there's kind of a wintry kind of waltz, ice skating waltz, jazzy feel to it. And then it was, again, I don't know why, just a little tubular bell here and there, just not very high in the mix, but just there. It just gives you that feeling of like Big Ben donging in the background. And then And yeah, I think there's some sleigh bells in there if I remember rightly, just to give that Christmassy, like that wintry feel, of course. And then for New York, it was a similar. That my feeling on that was kind of imagining walking through Central Park in springtime when you're in a good mood and the sun's shining on you, and the flowers are blossoming, and it's got that kind of casual gait. And that jazzy piano. But yeah, it's a funny one because a lot of the reviews have actually said, oh yeah, it's got this, the soundtrack is kind of a relaxing jazz or relaxing kind of bossa nova, easy listening soundtrack. And those words never came into the process, like those genre terms never really came into the process. Like that was never something that we explicitly discussed. I guess it was just something that kind of my background as a jazz saxophonist, is one of my parts of my musical identity. I was definitely bringing that into it. But yeah, it's just funny how these things naturally evolve, and then you kind of get told them after the fact, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I suppose it's a fair appraisal.
So, but making notes on sort of what any conclusions that we can kind of draw from what makes what lessons can we learn about making a good puzzle game soundtrack. And what I've got was less is more. Complement the gameplay without drawing people's ear, and don't irritate people. Like, don't annoy them away from the game. I think those seem to be like three sort of consistent things that have come up. Would you say there's anything? Is there anything else? Are there any other sort of like rules or principles that you stick to when composing for a puzzle game?
I think that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are great rules. I think the general principles of game composition always apply. So always remember, and this is something that I definitely didn't do in this process of scoring Is This Seat Taken, always remember that the music is not the main character, that you're ultimately working to create something that's subservient to the overall experience for the player, and let that be your guide. Luckily, I had very good developers who knew what they wanted and were really good with their communication. But you're not always blessed with that. So you got to if you can bring that mindset into your process, that's definitely a helpful step. And then anything else? Yeah, I think there's just the marimba. If you can use the marimba in a puzzle game, I just feel like it's just made to sound puzzly with like a Dorian mode or something. Just a cheeky little bit of like chromatic marimba just works. I don't know why, but it's just a classic.
That's the key. That's the one. That's the key to unlock the puzzle that is the puzzle game soundtrack. I'll add that to the list. Fantastic. Thank you. This will be published. Like, this is all going to get etched into concrete for people to review.
Oh no.
Do you have any closing thoughts, or do you have any upcoming projects that you want to mention?
As part of my games composing, I do quite a lot of work for Playdate Games, which is the handheld games console made by Panic that has a crank. It's a little yellow kind of slice of cheese with buttons, basically. Very cute. If you haven't got one and you enjoy video games, I definitely recommend picking one up, because it's been out for a few years now, and there is just an absolute gold mine of amazing experiences being built specifically for Playdate. And yeah, a recent game it was actually a rhythm game. So as part of a Playdate purchase, you get season 1 of games included. And as I say, the console's been out for a while. So this year, season 2 debuted, and Otto's Galactic Groove was included in that, which was a game that I scored, a rhythm game where you're playing as a tiny little sea slug flying around a weird galaxy, meeting all sorts of crazy characters, and traveling, planet hopping. Much to Otto's chagrin, I will say, he's a bit of a reluctant hero, but he's very endearing. And that one, my soundtrack for that is a mixtape of all Y2K inspired madness. So hip hop, Nintendo vibes. What else have we got in there? We got some kind of alternative rock. So PJ Harvey. Early Radiohead, all that kind of thing. Hopefully a fun treasure trove of weird music to discover. And then another project from end of last year that I do want to shout out is called Completely Stretchy, which is a kind of trippy electronic psychedelic soundtrack, which is out on Steam. You can give that a play now. That's just a really wacky and fun sci-fi adventure game. Definitely want to big that one up.
Rupert, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I've had a great time. Thanks for bigging up my music. I really, really appreciate it. It means a lot.
So, less is more. Complement the gameplay. Don't annoy the player. Stay humble. A bit of Mellotron, and a lot more marimba. Thanks to Rupert for taking the time to talk with me. We talked more about a lot of other stuff, including quite a bit about the playdate, which is very much something I want to talk to Rupert about, but that's beyond the scope of this episode. Also, I've ordered one now, and I'm hoping to do some episodes on the handheld, the games, and the artists that make them in the future. So hopefully, we'll hear from Rupert again in the future. So let's put a pin in that for now. You're listening to Brussels from Is This Seat Taken? Now, this is one great style of puzzle game soundtrack, but now we need to talk about another. Let's take a trip across the ocean to talk to our next guest, the composer of the Mind Over Magnet soundtrack.
I'm Zach Jones. I'm a game designer, audio person. I do a lot of stuff, music related, sound design. I've worked on re-record mixing, all that kind of stuff. So kind of a bit of a jack of all trades as far as the audio stuff goes.
Zach Jones is a multidisciplinary artist working across video games, sound design, photography, and writing. Online, he goes by the alias Honeyboy, and as that overview of his work suggests, he has created or contributed to a wide range of projects. In terms of game design, he made an atmospheric, minimalist visual narrative based on a short story by the author Daniel Dawes called Party for Whoever's Out There, and was part of a team that made Mechromancy, a 3D traversal game with an intimate narrative built around getting to know an AI while wandering around alien landscapes. Personally, I really like his sound design work. I like his album, Music for the Interactive Endeavour, but it's his game soundtracks that really hit, especially the one for Lime Juice, which is exactly my kind of jaunty, melodic, beats and boops kind of video game soundtrack. His most current work, on Mind Over Magnet and Wordplay, is what we'll be talking about today, but we're also going to touch on a wild-looking future project. First, same question to Zach. What was the game that took games from distraction to hobby? Well, for this episode, his might be the perfect answer.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. It's one of the first games that I played. So I feel like I kind of had this, the way that I was thinking about games, video games in particular, from an early age was kind of shaped by the game Myst. Point and click adventure game. Growing up, I played that with my dad, and then also on my own. And that kind of, I think that style of game and how both minimal but also otherworldly, and the way that they build narrative directly tied to the game itself was pretty good. It really shaped the way that I perceived video games at large. So I think I kind of went into gaming from that point with that in mind, that games were kind of this other way of delivering a narrative or story, or having some sort of piece of interactive fiction.
You're like a multidisciplinary artist working across game design, sound design, photography, and writing. You made like a visual novel called Party for Whoever's Out There. I was playing that this morning. That is
awesome.
an experience.
Yeah.
And so a meditative like audio-visual experience called Potentiality. for like the sound design for that is like quite abstract. And then there's Lime Juice. So the soundtrack for that features, I thought, like some sort of shared audio design with Mind Over Magnet and Wordplay, which we'll be talking about later.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the difference sort of I noticed between a few these projects is like difference between working solo and working with other devs. So, how does your approach change when you're working in these differing ways?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I largely started off solo, with my music production early on. I was kind of very, traditional solo artist, that kind of stuff. And I started doing these like club nights in Philadelphia. I was running these monthly shows where we would get a bunch of other artists out there, mostly DJ, electronic focused type of things. But that was kind of where I started working with other people in the same field, and we weren't necessarily directly collaborating, but there was intentionality behind it where whether you're going back to back with someone DJing or just setting up like a whole lineup for a night, taking other people's work and considerations into the picture whenever making choices for either my own work or like combining other artists together to like bring people together in that way. And I think that was kind of definitely a through line for collaborating with games projects where I was working with other developers, where I felt pretty comfortable to take inspiration from and also direction from the developer, whether it was a solo developer or a small team, taking things that they would express interest in and maybe didn't have the words to put exactly what they were interested in, but starting to get more of like feelings and emotional direction and that kind of stuff. I felt like it was a pretty smooth transition between the two worlds, even though they seem so disparate, but like the electronic music dance world and then the games world, I was finding like commonality there with a lot of that kind of stuff. And yeah, as far as like how that differs, I feel like a lot of the time it really is just me seeing where my interests lie and how they align with whoever I'm working with. So generally, I think it comes pretty early on in a project if the interests, if there's going to be enough of the interests aligned that we'll be able to have that kind of like smooth collaboration. So most of the time when I'm working with someone else, it feels pretty natural and very similar to like my solo practice as well, where I'm kind of like doing the thing that I'm interested in, but in a way that is aligning with the other party.
Sound design is sort of at the forefront of a lot of what you do. What's your favorite thing about sound design?
That's a tough one. I like collecting. I like collecting sounds. So I think even when I'm setting out to like make a sound from scratch, or I've done work for TV, for example, where what's being shown on the screen is if you were to take a 1-to-1 of the sound, it wouldn't quite sound right, if that makes sense. Like it wouldn't be punchy enough, or it wouldn't really get the feeling across of what the thing is. So a lot of times with that, it's just a matter of having a pretty broad collection of sounds and then taking different pieces of different sounds and like combining them. But I find myself getting like really excited about the collection process. So going out, whether that's going out like in nature or in the city and recording stuff, or recording stuff from found footage, stuff on the computer, YouTube, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I get really into the collection process with sound design.
I'm quite excited to ask this, given sort of the games that you've actually made, and it sort of say to me that you have quite a mature and sort of like broad understanding of what games can be. So what is your experience with puzzle games? Like, do you have any favorites? Like, are there any other than Myst that inspire you?
I think if I could, kind of cross from puzzle into the strategy tactics world, I think that's maybe where there's more connections. I was a huge fan of games like Final Fantasy Tactics, and turn-based games, turn-based strategy games, and finding Especially like with some recent, not that recent, but Into the Breach as an example of like it's tactics, but if you peel away a lot of the theming, it feels more like a puzzle game as well, where there's limited solutions, sometimes only one optimal way to like solve a level. So I think off the top of my head, I think I probably focused more and had more interest in like strategy and tactics games, but in like the puzzly kind of direction.
Yeah, because they're not generally thought of as sort of traditional puzzle games, but there is still a problem. There is still a problem that you're trying to solve. You are fundamentally still trying to solve a problem. Like what you're being presented with is still a puzzle for you to unpick. So, speaking about soundtracks in particular, like what do you think are the hallmarks of a good puzzle game soundtrack?
So it's kind of a funny thing. I tend to turn off music in most games. So whenever I boot up a new game, like one of the first things I will do, more recently, I will turn the music down, like way down. But for a long period of time, I would just turn the music off completely. I think it was back to like older Bethesda games like Oblivion, some of the Fallout games. At the time, I think it was probably a little bit of like wanting it to be more diegetic, not wanting like this grand orchestral music to be playing over what felt like a more realistic or what have you kind of gameplay experience. But then I just noticed I would do that with most games, and I think it's kind of true for how I approach making music for puzzle games and that kind of stuff. Is like a lot of the times the music feels on top of whatever the gameplay loop is, and a lot of the times that's intentional, and it works. But I often find anytime like music is distracting or doesn't quite fit with what I'm thinking, like that doesn't fit with what the game loop feels like it should be presenting, I generally would just turn it off. It was funny. Mark Brown, the Game Maker's Toolkit. When we started chatting at first, we had this big conversation about that, and about it was like, most of the time I'm playing games with no music at all, but then for puzzle games specifically, I think finding something where it like really easily slides into the background, where it is just background noise, which it feels weird to make music specifically to be ignored almost, or to be kind of put in the background. But I think for me, that's a really important part of making music for puzzle or any kind of like thinky type game, is to have the music be really out of the way, and almost like a secondary thought.
Yeah. So getting on to talking about Mind Over Magnet. So Game Maker's Toolkit, Mark Brown is probably like the most well-known developer that you've worked with. What was that like? Like, how does the process work? Does he was there like a brief for the soundtrack? Did you work with Mark to sort of define exactly what it was you were going for with the soundtrack before you started work on it?
Yeah, so I mean, from the beginning, with the Mind Over Magnet project, he had been kind of developing it alongside the YouTube channel and posting regular updates, developer updates, and that kind of stuff about the process. So it was interesting to kind of watch that happening and see the direction that he was already going. And then when we got in touch and started collaborating, I had sent over some pieces of music that I had worked on just for various projects, and he had a couple that he was particularly drawn to, and in those tracks that he was drawn to, there was a lot of them contained like a Celeste instrument, kind of like higher pitched, twinkling sounds, that kind of stuff, and he was particularly drawn to that. And we talked about some of the the characters in the game. There's not a lot of characters, but the ones that you're interacting with, the magnets in particular, have a lot of personality, and I think he was associating the Celeste with the kind of metallic sounds and personality from some of these characters. So that was really the launching point for our talks back and forth early on, was this interest in particular instrumentation. And then from there, a lot of it was the ideas that he had for the particular biomes that he was working on, and wanting them to feel connected, but also specific to themselves. And I think a lot of that work was done visually with the really strong colors in the backgrounds. And that was another place that I would go to, both for inspiration and to kind of get a general sense of the direction, were the color palettes that were being used for the levels.
In the soundtrack, like I hear like quite a bit of like busy percussion, like a lot of strong melodies. And I'm glad you said like sort of twinkle, because I literally wrote that down. A lot of twinkling instruments, and there's a bit of sort of a late night on the bus kind of vibe to some of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough going on, like for each piece to be sort of listenable outside of the game, but it's not so busy that it overwhelms or distracts the player when you're actually playing. There was one song, Engine, which I thought was a good example of this, because I distinctly remember being quite a bit stuck on some of the puzzles. Not too proud to admit. But I didn't get frustrated because I found the music was like so lifting, because of like these strong melodies that are in it. Now, is that something that you set out like deliberately to achieve? And is there anything specific in your approach to like composition that you think helps to achieve that?
The first thing that I'll do, like when I'm making like a sketch for a song, is to just have whatever sketch in a loop form, and then I'll play it in the background myself, like throughout the day. So whenever I'm like working on other projects or doing chores around the house or walking around the park or anything, I'll just kind of have the loop like running in the background. And that's kind of where I'm checking for some of like more of the emotional feeling. I have a musical background, but not, I'm not classically trained. I don't know a lot of music theory and that kind of stuff. But so, yeah, as far as like the emotional feeling and this feeling of uplifting, it was something that Mark and I had talked about with the puzzle game in particular, and kind of the choices he was making in the level design and that kind of stuff, to have we knew that people would get frustrated if they're playing for a while and not succeeding. So I think the direction was kind of leaning towards having the music feel positive, if that kind of uplifting and positive, and keeping that as like a baseline. So even if like in the sewer track and some of the earlier tracks, it's kind of a little bit more muted and a little bit more almost creepy in a way, where that was some of the intention behind those, but the backbone of the piece is still going to be kind of going upwards, like lifting the player upwards. So if it does become something where they're stuck in a particular part for a long period of time, it's the music at least isn't also potentially adding to this sense of, well, I'm not getting it, I'm failing or not understanding. I think from my perspective also, I have a background in percussion more than the melodic instruments, and so I felt like having lighter percussion, and I think as you said, kind of like there was a lot of it. There's a lot of percussion and that kind of stuff. But having this kind of almost jazz like percussion with the drums in particular, I think helped to keep it a little lighter, a little more flowing, and kind of go in that direction. Okay. I think those are the main considerations for like having the sense of uplifting in the music.
That game's been like quite a success because you've worked with Game Maker's Toolkit again for wordplay. The soundtrack to this, I really like the Bandcamp description that you've got for this. It's warm melodic songs with a beat, designed for pondering, doing, and a little dancing, inspired by classic life simulation games. I really like the description of the music, but it was that last bit that really got me. What classic life simulation games were you inspired by for this one?
So The Sims 1, actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and there's one of the songs in particular was more or less the building music and some of the shop music from The Sims 1. Mark and I both kind of chatted about that early on in the process with wordplay as well, and it was just kind of this era. There's a record label, I think they're defunct at this point, called Windham Hill, and they do a lot of this kind of light jazz, almost elevator music stuff with some of the artists that they've put out. It was mostly in like I think between the 70s and 80s, and a lot of that was also in The Sims, the first Sims game. So I was definitely listening to a lot of The Sims throughout the process of making the Wordplay soundtrack.
Yeah, Wordplay and Mind Over Magnet, they're both puzzle games, but they're very different types of puzzle game.
Mm-hmm.
So in Mind Over Magnet, you're soundtracking like action, there's movement, there's like very sort of like distinct, discrete environments. But with Wordplay, you as a composer, you don't have that guide. You've just got this board, like words, and other than some of the moving tiles that you get, like it's quite a static screen. As a result of that, like your music is like it's much more like centralized in establishing sort of like the tone and like the player's relationship to the game. Was that a concern for you, like going into the game? Did it affect your approach to like composing for it at all?
It did, yeah. It was a bit a bit daunting at first, because Mind Over Magnet had kind of a very concrete setting, and in the process of Mind Over Magnet, I typically would start with some sort of ambiance track. I would start with water dripping or steam vents, venting steam, and tried to incorporate a lot of those sounds almost as sound effects in their own right, but then into the music. And so with Wordplay, I was very excited about the project, but I was like, I'm not sure what that process would look like for a game like this. And there's kind of infinite directions you could go in as far as what the background of a tile placing word puzzle game could be. I think I at least tried at first. I'm not sure how much it stayed throughout the process, but I tried to start similarly, where I would start with kind of a blanket of ambiance in the background and then kind of build up a track from that. Some of the early sketches were kind of like rain noise, kind of like a rainy day, and you're just gonna chill on the couch and play some sort of physical game like Scrabble or something, and what that would sound like, and then tried to translate that into the music. But I'd say probably halfway or so through the process, I just started making songs in a more traditional way without like the ambiance track being involved.
So I think that like the style of the two soundtracks is like broadly comparable. You can hear similarities in the two, but for me, in Wordplay, it feels like the melodies are pushed maybe a little more to the foreground. There's a bit less of that sort of like late night on the bus kind of vibe. Would you say that's accurate? If it was that a deliberate choice?
I think it is, as you describe. And I think it was maybe not a deliberate choice, but it also came down to some of the other constraints of not having almost a narrative arc. I think with the Mind Over Magnet songs, I was playing the game while working on the tracks, and so I would have kind of this mental image of the beginning of the levels and the zone, the biome, and as you worked towards the end, and I believe that kind of bled into the music production itself, where I kind of had a bit of a narrative arc that would go along with the songs. But with Wordplay, it was more of a almost creating the songs in a void. So less of that. But something that I think maybe tied in a little bit more with the Wordplay soundtrack was the idea of the challenge levels, the boss levels, essentially, where as you're playing, you get to a certain level of in Wordplay where there's like a constraint that locks the first number of tiles or limits the words that you can make. And I worked on basically taking the regular song and making like a alternate version of it. And so to me, I think that's where I took some of that same approach, where it's like if you put the two versions together, like the regular and then the alternate version, they kind of are doing a little bit more of that narrative arc in a way. But I think because they're siloed from each other and they kind of like one can play not both in succession, that's more of like a just the way that I was thinking of it.
I was going to come on to talking about what you're like currently working on now, which is Deep Mess. It's interesting because you talked about tactics games earlier. So this is a game described as a turn-based tactics descent into the mind of God. and it has an amazing trailer. So it's a tactics game, so it's definitely like puzzle adjacent, and based on that trailer, the music's like a lot more up tempo. Since there's a bit of drum and bass influence, like it's much more frantic, it's much more like in your face, like completely different style and discipline to Wordplay and Mind of a Magnet. I was wondering if you'd like to talk a little bit about what this game is and what your approach to the soundtrack for it is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so Deep Mess is I've been working on this game for a couple of years at this point. There's 3 of us working on the game, and I do a lot of the game design as well as the audio, so sound effects and music and that kind of stuff. But it's been a very, very different process because of being so heavily involved in the design itself of the game. But early on in the process, we wanted to make something that was felt different for the genre space. So instead of more fantasy-based or mechs, sci-fi mech based tactics game, going in a more squishy, visceral, there was an episode of Magic School Bus, a cartoon from a number of years ago, where they go inside, they shrink the school bus with the kids, and then they go inside one of the kids, and they're going through the stomach and the intestines and that kind of stuff. We wanted to combine that, and very early on, we landed on like Toonami, which was it was like Adult Swim, Cartoon Network era, early 2000s, late 90s, drum and bass, jungle music, and that kind of that direction of it, not punk music, but that direction of like punk aesthetic and that kind of stuff. It was fun for me also because that's kind of where a lot of my earlier productions were definitely more dance focused, drum and bass, house, that kind of stuff. So it felt fun to take a genre that's not as prevalent in the games, in especially like tactics games, and try to like fit that into a tactics space. Kind of like breaking a lot of my own conventions as far as like music that would fall into the background. It was like, well, this music's kind of going to be in the way.
There are no rules for puzzle game soundtracks. It needs to stay out of the way, be melodic, but also be like really loud and in your face. I just have to complement, like, I guess just complementing the gameplay is sort of like the key, like the through line here. Yeah, I think that game looks wild. I'm looking forward to seeing more of it. Do you have like a roadmap like for it? Any idea of like when it will be coming out?
Yeah. So at this point right now, we've had a version of the game, like a demo of the game on Steam for a couple of months. We've been working kind of towards fleshing out of a lot of the major systems. So yeah, I don't know. It's been an interesting project to work on. We last year and the year before, we were pitching it out to publishers and that kind of stuff. And then with the state of the games industry and indie publishing in particular, we kind of firsthand experienced a lot of the closures of publishing studios and that kind of stuff. So we got a lot of good feedback and a lot of interest in the game, but the indie publishing was and has been in a pretty rough state. So we kind of took a step back from active development on Deep Mess and kind of have been working on other projects, freelance projects, teaching, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think right now the goal is to just continue fleshing out, the economy of the game and some of the other systems that we've been excited to work on, and then kind of see where things are at that point. Because it seems these days indie publishing is kind of starting to see a little bit more of an upswing. There's more positivity around it, but we've also we've been very interested in potentially self-publishing in the next couple of years.
Do you have any like final thoughts or that you want to share, or is there anything else that you're currently working on that you'd like to talk about?
No, as I said before, I mean, semester's about to start, so I'm getting back into the educator mode. And I'm excited. I can't say if Mark is going to be working on any other games. I know after Mind Over Magnet came out, he made that statement about done for a while, not going to make any more games. But then he was already working on Wordplay, so that was kind of a funny thing.
And then 9 months later, he drops this insanely addictive word game.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no. Otherwise, Deep Mess is the main project. I am always kind of working on music. My own personal practice as well. So, it's always nice to kind of get back into it.
Zach, thanks for your time.
Yeah, I hope there were some good bits in there. It was fun to talk about it. I haven't done a lot of these style back and forth interviews, so yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So, to draw some broad, probably quite reductive conclusions, stay out of the way, be melodic, a bit of The Sims, and a bit of jazz. But also, if the game needs it, some 160 BPM drum and bass. Thanks to both Rupert and Zach for their generosity with both their time and responses. What I like about the answers we've heard from both of them is this. There are guidelines for composing for puzzle games, best practices and conscientious principles and so on. But, like all art, what makes it work is the intangibles, the skill and vision of the composer to make those guidelines work. Like the puzzles they soundtrack, there is a framework, a solution, but you need imagination to get there. That was Rupert Cole and Zach Jones on the soundtracks to Is This Seat Taken and Mind Over Magnet. And thanks again to my two guests today. This episode doesn't happen without them, so I strongly recommend you check out their work. All links are in the show notes, but just to vocalise them, Rupert Cole can be found at rupertcole.co.uk, on which you'll find links to his music and socials. Go to his Bandcamp and listen to his video game soundtracks, especially Otto's Galactic Groove, for a pretty mind-bending experience. Zach Jones can be found at zacharydavidjones.com. You can find his music there, including the excellent soundtrack to Lime Juice, but I encourage you to check out that visual novel I mentioned earlier, Party for Whoever's Out There. It's very weird and very funny. As a reminder, links in the show notes. Thanks for listening. The artwork for this podcast was produced by Pixel Benny. You can find the show online at dialoguetree.cc. Talk to you next time.